I'm going to run you through some study advice, some study tips that I've developed over the years. Most of the study advice that we get in our society is based on what we call anecdotal evidence. It's just people have tried something and it kind of worked for them, and so they run with it. And so you get advice like, oh, you need to find a quiet place off in a corner all by yourself. You need to study at exactly the same time every day, and things like that. And the problem is that none of those are actually based or supported by the science. And so today I'm going to give you some advice that's based on the latest in neuroscience research. Now, I know that saying that makes me sound a little bit crazy, so let me show you that I have based this on the ideas of some real people. So these are the two cognitive scientists that I have based this on. See, these two study learning. They're the kind of people who hook a person's brain up to a scanner and see what's actually going on up there. And so instead of basing what I'm going to tell you on tradition, I'm basing it on actual science. This is research based, and this has worked really well for students in my classroom. So here is tip number 1. Instead of just reviewing the stuff, you're going to practice it. Most people will tell you to just read through your notes. You go through and you just read your notes again and again and again and again until you've learned it. The problem, have you ever sat and read something, you get to the end, and you were so bored that you realized that you didn't absorb any of the information in there? It happens all the time. So instead of just rereading your notes, you should fish in your brain. You should ask yourself some questions and go through and try to pull that information back out. The simple act of trying to retrieve the information instead of trying to shove it in there will essentially tell your brain that this is important stuff. But how do you know what you're supposed to get out of your memory? Well, this is where the key question, get it? It's a key and a question. This is where the key questions that I've had you write come into play. So whenever I've had you set up your notes, every time I've had you set up your notes, we've started with a key question, writing that up in the top corner, and then of course you put the answer down here. And then I have had you write other questions on one of the sides of the paper. Well, when you ask yourself those questions, instead of just rereading your notes here in this section, then you are fishing out of your brain. Well, so what are these notes for? Well, if you don't remember, you might need to reread your notes. But when you reread your notes, you're going to look for the answers to those questions, and that's going to solidify the knowledge in your head. Here's study tip number 2. You're going to space out your practice. A lot of people, and this is like the college way most college students try to do it, they try to learn it really quickly. I'm going to cram this information into my brain the night before the test. And that has probably worked for most of you in the past, for most classes. You've gone in, you've crammed it in right before the test, and then you've promptly forgotten it. The problem is you're going to have to remember everything you learn in here until May. And so instead, what you need to do is you need to space out your learning. You need to learn a little bit here and a little bit there. There's been a lot of people who have made claims about how people learn, but as they've done research into it, they've found that most of those claims aren't true. Your brain actually doesn't have a big complicated thing that helps it know what's important. It just remembers things that are repeated. If it sees it again and again and again, it's going to think, oh, this is important. I better remember this. This is why you have really irritating songs in your head. I remember commercials from when I was a small child because they were repeated so many times, my brain thought those were important. You can't just shove information in your head by thinking, oh, this is important, you've got to remember this. Your brain remembers things that it sees over and over and over. So what do you need to do? Space out your practice. Study a little bit when you're waiting in line at the grocery store, when you're just waiting for dinner to be ready, when you're hanging out and your friends aren't there yet. If you space it out and do it a little bit at a time, then you are more likely to remember it because your brain thinks that it's important. Now, you would think that sleep would be really popular with teenagers, but I've found that it isn't. A lot of them will stay up late and still get up fairly early, and it doesn't work. Sometimes people even try to stay up late studying the night before. I had one student whose parents made him stay up until 1 a.m. studying for the AP test the night before. He failed. He got the lowest score you could possibly get because your body doesn't do well when it's functioning on inadequate sleep. Now, they don't know exactly why, but people who've slept better can retrieve information better than those who are tired. They also know that sleep helps memories consolidate. It helps put them together, helps them coalesce in your brain in the places that they need to be stored. And so if you don't have adequate sleep, your memories don't consolidate properly. So this is what you should actually do. But maybe not with all that snoring. Now, I know that a lot of you are thinking, well, I can't sleep, I don't have time. Now, that might be true, but it might not be. Think, could you watch one fewer episode on Netflix? Just not as many? Or could you spend less time on YouTube? Or maybe ask your boss to go home from work a little bit earlier. Most of us have time that we waste. And I don't think it's too crazy to say maybe you should spend some of that time taking care of your own body. Here's number 4. Switch it up. Now, most people are going to tell you that you need to take your turn for each piece of information. So if you're studying for history class, you need to spend 20 minutes on history class. Then you need to spend 20 minutes on math. Don't jump around. Well, it turns out that that's actually not what you should do. Your brain needs you to make some changes. So if you sit and you study one thing for 2 or 3 minutes and then switch to something else and study that for 2 or 3 minutes, for some reason it actually makes your brain learn the information better. It might be related to that thing we discussed earlier, where you should space it out and you remember things that are repeated. But no matter the reason, people learn things better when you switch it up, when you trade what you're learning. Number 5 is to test yourself. The mistake people make is they wait until the day of the exam to go in and see what happens. I'm going to go in and try, and that day I'm going to find out what I know. I'm going to see if I'm ready for this puppy. But you might not have prepared for the exam properly. You might not be ready the same way. So instead, you should test yourself. You should anticipate questions you might be asked and ask those of yourself. See, what happens is this. The more you use a pathway in your brain, the more your brain travels that way of thinking, the stronger and better and thicker that pathway to that information is going to be. If you never use it, it's going to end up like this. It's going to start to go back to the nothingness from which it came. But if you use it a lot, it's going to be more like this one. Ignore the water. Pretend that's not there. It was still a good picture, so I used it. It's going to be a thick, wide superhighway. Because you've asked yourself these questions, because you've tested your own knowledge, your brain's going to think that's important. It's going to thicken those pathways, and it's going to be much better. But how do you do it? You just ask yourself. You just ask yourself questions that you think might be on the test. Oh, they might ask it this way. They might do it this way. And it doesn't really matter if you're wrong. It still helps your brain's pathways get thicker. As you go through and you test yourself, you will see what you know and what you don't. You'll be able to look at it and be like, oh, I thought I understood this, but I clearly don't. I need to spend some more time here. Or, look, I've got this. I know how this works. And you can go from there. Here's the last one, and it's not usually an issue with high school students, but I thought I'd pass it on to you so you could be more successful at the college level. Marketers are really good at trying to convince you that you need your own computer in class every day, just like all of these students. But it actually is not the best idea. And you may be thinking that this is why, that it's because you're tempted to screw around and not be focused on what you should be focused on. And yes, that's a problem, but that isn't the main reason why. It turns out that when a person uses a computer to take notes, their brain just tries to transcribe the words. It doesn't process or absorb the information. But when you take notes by hand, it just goes through some different processing in your brain, and so it's easier to remember it. So you guys who know me know I love computers, but sometimes it isn't the best tool. Now, if you'd like more information on these study tips, this is one of my sources, so go ahead and check out that link if you'd like. Thanks for looking through my study tips with me. Happy studying.